and welcome to Know Your Rights. This is the show where you hear directly from lawyers who break down the law and explain the rights of citizens on common legal issues that confront Belizeans on a regular basis. Tonight, we will be discussing extradition. This, of course, is a very sensitive topic, as it involves the transfer of Belizean citizens to foreign countries who then stand trial for very serious crimes. Some, when found guilty, end up serving jail sentences of over 20 years. Joining us to give insight on this important topic is attorney Magalie Perdomo, attorney at law with Reyes and Ratridge LLB. Good evening and welcome, Magalie.
Hi, good evening, good evening.
And I don't know if you know Magalie, but you are the second attorney to return for the second time.
Oh, excellent.
So congratulations, because a lot of viewers don't know how much prep work our attorneys actually have to invest in getting ready for this episode and how difficult it is to, and how much courage you need for come up here.
It's quite a good experience. It's quite a good experience.
So tonight you're speaking to us on extradition, and maybe it's not a homey topic or something that we encounter every day in the news or so for Belize. So explain to us, what is extradition first of all?
All right, Khadija. So extradition, first of all, is an area which is near and dear to my heart. I've been involved in many extradition cases while working as a Crown Counsel at the Surgeon's Office. And so what extradition is, it's basically the process by which a country seeks the return of a person back to that country after that person has either been accused of committing a crime or been convicted of committing a crime in that country. So let's say, for example, use the example of Timbuktu and Belize. Paul lives in Timbuktu. Paul commits murder or is accused of committing murder, charged for murder in Timbuktu. Sometime between the time that he's actually taken up for trial or if he's convicted, imprisoned, Paul somehow leaves Timbuktu and comes to Belize.
Okay.
Extradition is the process by which Timbuktu will ask Belize to please send Paul back to either stand trial or face the conviction for whatever offense, in this case, for example, murder.
Okay.
So that is the process of extradition.
Okay, and you pointed out accused or convicted.
Correct.
Now, the accused part kind of scare me because at that point that I don't know if you do it or not.
Well, you're charged.
You're charged. But that they ask for bring you back.
Right, so that you can face trial.
Okay.
So that's the difference between extradition and, for example, a hearing in Belize.
Okay.
Because an extradition proceeding is not a trial. You don't have evidence, you don't do cross-examination. All you do is go before the court and establish whether the papers submitted by, for example, Timbuktu is sufficient in accordance with the treaty so that you can then be sent back to Timbuktu to face the trial, or if you've been convicted, to be sentenced.
Okay, so they will have to go through some sort of process then.
Correct. So countries have to request extradition, and the reason for this is based on a principle called territorial jurisdiction, right?
Okay.
What that means is that crimes committed outside Belize we're not really concerned with. So Belize cannot try a person, cannot convict anybody that commits a crime, let's say in Brazil or in Timbuktu or in America.
Yeah.
We're not concerned with that.
Yeah.
We are only concerned with crimes committed within our territorial jurisdiction, within our boundaries.
Okay.
So,
okay.
And most countries across the world operates under that principle. However, as times pass, countries realized that people would commit crimes and then go somewhere else, and then they would be protected by that principle. So what countries did is they got together and they made arrangements, which we call treaties, where they agree. So Timbuktu will sign a treaty with Belize, and they will agree that if Paul commits a crime in Belize and I want him back, I will use the treaty, we will agree to the terms, and I will then request that Belize sends Paul back to face the trial or conviction or whatever happens.
Okay.
Right?
So this doesn't happen between all countries? Because I ask because I watch a couple movies
No.
where they would do something wrong and you see the criminal, they say, "I could try to reach
So-
out because we could evade extradition."
So the rule is you must have an arrangement with that country.
Okay.
Because that principle of extraterritorial jurisdiction is very, very important. Like I said, I cannot be concerned with what you do. Imagine that countries can go around charging people in other countries. It would be chaos. And so I cannot be concerned with what you do in another country. But if we have an arrangement with that country, I can ask for that country to send you back.
So what are listed under the terms of such treaties then?
So let's look at the process first of all, right? Extradition is a process which is unique because it's both an executive, it has both an executive element and a legal or a judicial element, right?
Okay.
So unlike, for example, a normal crime where you're charged and then you're taken to court, you go through trial, you're found guilty, you're either fined or you're imprisoned. Extradition starts first of all with the minister. It starts with the government, with the executive, because like I said, it's based on an agreement between two countries. So if Timbuktu wants to, let's say Paul goes to Timbuktu, like I say, he commit murder, he runs off to Belize. It's not that Timbuktu will write a letter and say, pursuant to section so and so of the treaty, please send Paul back tomorrow. No, it's an entire process that has to take place. So it starts with the executive process. The Secretary of State or the minister in Timbuktu will write to the minister of Belize. He will submit what is called a diplomatic note with bundles attached or evidence attached to say, okay, Paul commit murder in Timbuktu. These are the offenses where he commit, or this is the situation, the evidence that I have against him. And I want you now to start the extradition process to get him back here. Then the minister submits an order or issues an order. If he looks at the papers and he satisfies himself that, okay, this is a case where I can act under the treaty, he then writes to the chief magistrate. So you start off at the magistrate's court, writes to the chief magistrate and asks the chief magistrate to issue an order for Paul's arrest.
This is the chief magistrate in
Belize. Correct.
Yes.
So the minister then writes to the chief magistrate, issue an order for Paul's arrest. I've gotten these extradition bundles. Bring him to the court and let him answer and see whether this is a case which we can properly surrender him. The magistrate will then issue the order. Paul is arrested. He's then brought before the magistrate with his attorney or whatever, and bundles are then presented, right, by a representative from the government. So one of the provisions of the treaty is that if Timbuktu requests extradition from Belize, Belize has to provide the legal representation for that process. Right, so you'll see that it's the Crown Counsel from the Surgeon's office that would usually go and present the bundle. The Crown Counsel then goes before the court, the chief magistrate presents the bundle. Paul, and I recommend that if for any reason you are subject of an extradition request, lawyer up, get an attorney, right? Because it's a very complex area. Paul then shows up with his attorney. Crown Counsel attorney is there, and they then start going through the bundles, right, to see whether or not the evidence provided by Timbuktu is sufficient, to see whether these papers meet the requirement of under the treaty and under the law, right? So it's kind of a hearing, right? It's called a committal proceedings, right? However, it's not a trial. You won't have any determination of Paul's guilt or innocence. You won't have witnesses coming to court because our courts here will not determine whether he committed the trial in Timbuktu or not. All she has to do is look at in the bundles, and if she's satisfied that it meets the requirement of the treaty, she decides to commit Paul.
So it is just a determination if what the other country has is sufficient, basically.
And so the test, it's the magistrate will look to see if there's a prima facie case on the evidence. So she will ask herself, if Paul was convicted of murder in Belize, are these documents which have been submitted sufficient? Would they have been sufficient to convict Paul? If she says to herself yes, then she more than likely would decide, okay, I will commit him for extradition. It can be quite technical because usually you would have cases where when the committal proceeding starts, they will look at, for example, identification issues. Paul's attorney will probably come up and say, well, they haven't showed that this person is the same person they're requesting. One of the main elements of extradition is that the offense must be an offense in both countries. So
I
it's a
see.
dual criminality
I
test.
see, okay.
So if in
Okay.
Timbuktu you can be convicted for life for picking a mango,
Yes, yes.
that's not an offense in Belize. So if the bundles are sent to the minister and the minister goes to the chief magistrate
Yeah.
and she looks and see that that's the offense, immediately Paul's attorney will say, okay, this process fails because it doesn't meet the most important aspect of extradition, which is dual criminality. So it must be a crime in both countries.
It definitely is quite
Right?
technical, but we have to take a very short break, and then when we get back, we will continue our discussion on extradition. Back to Know Your Rights. I am Khadija Usher, and our guest tonight is attorney Magalie Perdomo, and we are discussing extradition, which involves the transfer of citizens to foreign countries to stand trial for crimes committed. So Magalie, we were at the magistrate court
Right.
in Belize.
Right.
As a part of the process. What comes after?
So you're now at the magistrate's court. Like I said, the process goes through. If she's satisfied on the bundles that there's a prima facie case against you, that you could serve, you could stand trial in Timbuktu, the example I'm using,
Yeah.
she will then order your extradition. So she will order your surrender.
Okay.
You then
Okay.
have 15 days after she makes that order to make what is sort of an appeal to the Supreme Court. It's called a habeas corpus, right?
Okay.
Application, so that you have the chance to appeal that order.
Yeah.
Some of the grounds by which you could appeal it, for example, is that there was some sort of abuse of process, the extradition itself was unlawful, so you
Okay.
can challenge
Okay.
her decision at the Supreme Court.
Okay.
And you go through the normal court process. If you're not happy with the Supreme Court's decision, you can go to the Court of Appeal, and then you find your way all the way to the CCJ.
Okay,
Right?
and this is still just the part
Still
for
the judicial
determine
part.
if you should be
Right,
sent
if
over,
you should
not
be
not
sent.
not the.
You
yeah.
haven't done, there hasn't been any evidence against you, because the
Yeah.
trial, like I keep saying, does not happen in Belize.
Yeah.
It's just to decide whether you will go or not. You can be extradited and you can go to Timbuktu and you're found innocent.
Okay.
Because your trial really takes place there.
Okay, okay.
So after you go to the highest court and the court said, you know what, that chief magistrate was right, I will uphold her order, you are to be surrendered. Why I keep saying is that extradition is different, because now it goes back again to the executive, to the government. So it starts with the executive, it goes through the judiciary, and then it goes back to the executive. So even after the courts have said you must go, you still have a last chance to make representations to the Minister of Foreign Affairs to use his discretion not to send you.
Oh, wow.
Right? So we've
Interesting.
had cases like that in Belize.
Interesting.
So after you finish up at the CCJ, the CCJ says you must go, you then you go with your attorney, you write out your representation, and you go before the minister and you explain, or you provide reasons or grounds upon which he should not send you. Some of the grounds that ministers consider, for example, is if it would be unjust and oppressive to send you, undue hardship on your family.
Okay.
In one case in the UK, the Secretary of State refused extradition for somebody because there was a real risk that he would commit suicide if he was sent.
Okay.
So these are the kind of considerations that the minister will look at,
Okay.
whether he decides to send you or not.
But at the end of the day, he have the final
He has
say.
the final say. So
Okay.
it starts with him and it
Okay.
ends with him.
Okay.
Very much an executive procedure.
Yeah. So this process can be quite lengthy.
Can be very long.
Have
be
you
very long.
encountered cases lasting more than like 6 months, a year or so?
Absolutely.
Really? Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So for Belize, which countries do we have such treaties with, if any?
So Belize has extradition treaties with the United States of America,
Okay.
Guatemala, and Mexico.
Okay.
Recently added Mexico.
Okay. Three
So
countries.
those are the three countries with which Belize has an arrangement
Okay.
to extradite
Extradite,
persons.
okay. Well, we're not trying to give nobody no ideas now, but
But it's the law. It's
there's
in the law.
That's
So
what we have with.
secret.
So it is not possible. Can we just put a statement out there? It is not possible for Belize to try and extradite from any other country apart from Mexico, U.S., and
You
Guatemala.
must have an arrangement.
You must have
an arrangement.
Okay.
And that treaty must be incorporated in our law. So it must be added to the Extradition Act, if you may.
Okay.
Right?
I'm curious about now you are being sent to the other country. This is basically now your country saying we are handing this person over to be tried under their law,
Correct.
under the other country's
Correct.
law?
Because that is where they committed the crime. That is they have the jurisdiction over that crime, right?
Yeah.
So that is why it's to be tried there.
Okay.
What is also important is what is contained in your treaty, because your treaty will set out the terms and conditions upon which this extradition can take place. For example, you have treaties which say, like I said, extraditable offenses are offenses which are punishable by a year or more.
Okay.
So you can't be extradited for minor offenses. It has to be punishable by imprisonment for a year or more. Most treaties say you can't be extradited for political offenses. That's an absolute bar. So for example, in countries where you might have said something wrong against the government and they charge you or convict you for that, and there's evidence that that's a political offense, you cannot be extradited for that. So treaty will set out those things. Treaties also provide for provisional arrest. So you might have, because extradition it can be, for lack of a better word, time sensitive. It's someone fleeing. And so time is of essence. In some cases, the person requesting extradition probably cannot send the bundle, cannot send the evidence immediately. What the treaties say, they can have a provisional arrest. So they can arrest you and then send the information afterwards for up to a period of about 60 days. Some treaties provide for that. So again, it depends on what your treaty says, right? Treaty also provides for what is the principle that you call specialty, meaning that if I agree to extradite Paul back to Timbuktu, he can only be tried for the offenses which form part of the bundle and upon which I'm extraditing him. So I can't extradite you for murder, and when you get that Timbuktu, then charge you for all kind of different offenses. So it must be for that offense that they request your extradition.
Okay. Under these terms, in your opinion, do you find that this bundle, the evidence required between country and country, is basically balanced? And I'm asking in terms of, I'm thinking about our Belizean investigation and the level of scale or the available equipment or resources we have and pump into our investigation to gather evidence might not be on the same par as USA, their evidence and what is necessary. Do you feel that the treaties try and balance out between country for, in terms of Belize, us being able to have this bundle to send to US and actually be able to extradite people from the United States?
Well, the treaty will set out the same terms for Belize and the same terms for America. So if Belize wants to make a request, they just have to put the bundle together in accordance with the treaty. I mean, it's not a big, there's no big science to it. Basically, you put your witness statements or your affidavits, you say what your offenses are, you explain what are the terms of those offenses under your laws. For example, what are punishable by imprisonment, fine, etc. So it's basically set out in a standard format.
So our treaties with Mexico, Guatemala, and United States, can you give us some ideas of the nature of those agreements, really?
So like I say, it will set out some of the process for extradition. It lists, a lot of times they list the offenses upon which you can be extradited. Like I say, it sets out the fact that you can't be extradited for political crimes. It sets out the provisional arrest. So it's usually pretty detailed as to what you must follow when you're requesting or when you're seeking to extradite somebody.
And what would you say is the important aspect of having these entire extradition agreements set in place? I mean, I had to think about it in as a layman term that Well, it's a win-win for me and the other country. I don't want a criminal in my country as much as you want to, let's say, protect the rights of whoever was harmed or inflicted by that person leaving the country. Is that really the essence or the importance of having such agreements?
Right. So like I say, countries might say, well, I notice crimes are happening in my country and people are going to a particular country. So it's in my interest to make an arrangement with that country to have Paul sent back to me, Timbuktu. The treaties also provide for who is to take care of the expenses. For example, if our treaty is, if Timbuktu requests that somebody is sent back to them, Belize has to take care of the actual court part.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the transportation of Paul back to Timbuktu or to the US or wherever, they're the ones who would have to bear that expense.
Okay.
So things like that the treaty would set out,
Would outline.
Yeah.
Okay, so we need to take one more short break, and when we get back, we will continue our conversation on extradition. Welcome back to Know Your Rights. I am Khadija Usher, and our guest tonight is attorney Magalie Perdomo, and we are discussing extradition, which involves the transfer of citizens to foreign countries to stand trial for crimes committed. So, Magalie, you are served your order from another country is requesting your extradition. What defenses do you have? What resistance you could basically put up?
So your first opportunity to challenge the extradition bundle is before the chief magistrate. And you have many defenses or many challenges that people would make to the extradition bundle and the evidence. One, for example, is identification. I'm not properly identified. Okay. That person that you have described in the extradition bundle, the ID you've provided, that's not me. Okay. We might have the same name, but that's not me. Or the bundles are not properly authenticated pursuant to the treaty. So the treaty sets out how these bundles must come. They must be authenticated by the Secretary of State or so. Not properly authenticated. Okay. And so those are some of the challenges. When you go to the higher court now, you have principles such as abuse of process, that it would be abusive or unjust, unfair or unjust to send you. For example, you would try to make a case that there's no way that you could have a fair trial if you're sent to Timbuktu. Absolutely no way. For example, so much time has passed, delay, lapse of times. These are some of the challenges you can make, some of the cases that you can make either to the courts or when you go to the minister. Right?
Okay. And as you said, the minister has the final say.
Right.
So I would imagine when all else has failed through the judicial system for you, the person you would have got to for make that final strong case would have been the minister.
Right.
So one other thing you mentioned was that both offenses must be applicable to both countries, basically. If it is a crime there, it has to be a crime here. So is it important for you to really know your rights
exactly
here
and there,
the
what you do?
Like
I keep repeating, if it is that you are, for some unfortunate reason, subject of an extradition request, get an attorney, because it can be very technical. Yes. You can succeed in challenging an extradition request on very technical grounds. Recently, we've had cases where extradition cases have fallen because the warrants weren't properly sent up. So minor things could result in sort of the process against you being thrown out. So it's very important to get an attorney. Do not show up at that magistrate's court alone, because, for example, one of the things that the treaties provide is that you can waive your right to extradition, and the last thing you want is to show up there, you're confused, you've been apprehended, you don't know what's going on, and then they go ask you if you want challenge, and you say no. And next thing you know, you're on your way out.
Yeah.
This isn't a case where you're in Belize and you're
Yeah.
going to be here to make appeals and,
Yeah.
and so forth. So definitely get somebody, and preferably somebody that knows the area, because it's a very, very niche area of the law. Like I
Yeah.
told you, it has many layers. You know, in law
Okay.
they said extradition is sui generis, meaning it's a creature of its own.
Okay.
So it's an interesting and fascinating area, though.
Okay.
One other thing I want to mention: people often get confused between extradition, deportation, expulsion. Extradition is not deportation.
Okay.
So deportation is more if you've actually committed a crime in Belize, you've actually done something wrong, you're here, you're not a Belizean, and they're getting you out to go back to your country.
Okay.
Extradition is not that. That's
Yeah.
a totally different situation where you actually committed a crime somewhere else and that country is asking for you.
Yeah.
Expulsion is another method in which persons who are sort of undesirables in Belize, and the minister is seeking to get them out, is a different process. So expulsion is a process, and we have an expulsion act where the minister, if somebody poses a serious threat to Belize, the minister can make an order that this person leave Belize.
A non-Belizean.
A non-Belizean.
Okay, a non-Belizean.
So expulsion, extradition, deportation,
Yeah.
different things. We
Okay.
often confuse them.
Yes, we do.
Extradition is
Yeah.
its own process, and
Yeah.
it can be many times a very lengthy process.
Okay, yes,
right?
because as far as we're concerned, all of that kind of seem like they're just to try and get you out, no?
Right.
Which is a good thing you cleared that up. I think after this episode, though, everybody want to know who for call if they get served an order for extradition. But unfortunately, we have come to the end of our show for tonight. Thank you, Magalie, for joining
Pleasure.
us and providing important information on tonight's topic. Know Your Rights will be back on April 9th when we will be joined by another guest attorney who will also break down your rights on another exciting topic. Tonight's episode of Know Your Rights repeats at 1 p.m. on Sunday on Channel 7, and it will also be available for your viewing on Facebook and YouTube. Thank you for watching, and we wish you all a safe and happy Easter.